Welcome, everyone. We're now going to get started with today's event. Thank you for joining me and the Provost and Vice President Academic, Dr. Drew Marshall, our Chief Academic Officer, and importantly, the architect behind our campus mental health strategy. I'm Andrew Zito, Director of the Campus Mental Health Strategy. I've watched this strategy grow from an idea to early implementation, and now to see it embedded in our work around campus. It's been rewarding to see its growth over the past 5 years. I'm grateful that we've embarked on this work before the impacts of the last few years, in which we've seen our city struggle financially and now magnified by the impacts of the pandemic. For a year, our students have had to learn online, while our instructors had to amend their teaching to fit within an online environment, in doing so in a way that met the university's commitment to excellence. This has been a monumental experience for so many of us, and I'm grateful we've had a few years on the mental health strategy under our belts, as I believe this helped us adapt to our new situations. We've had a year of change, including the pivot to working from home. All of us have different experiences with how that change manifested in our work, study, and in our personal lives, and how our community has come together to support each other. This is a living example of the importance of resilience. Launched in December 2015, this is the 5th year our campus mental health strategy has been making a difference in the lives of our campus community. We're happy to take a few minutes today to update you on our progress so far. Before we get into the details of the campus mental health strategy, it's important to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, including the Blackfoot Confederacy comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Wesley First Nations. Additionally, the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Next slide. So let me take a quick minute and walk you through today's agenda. We're going to get to a progress update from Dr. Drew Marshall. Immediately after, we'll have our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Michael Ungar, founder and director of the Resilience Research Center at Dalhousie University, who will share with us some of his international research on mental health and community resilience. Afterwards, we have a hand-selected panel of students and staff and faculty, moderated by Dr. Ungar. This panel will share their experiences, challenges, and feelings related to this past year, navigating through the pandemic. More importantly, they will discuss some of the protective factors that help us to be resilient and some of the things we can do as a community to support each other. Today's panel participants include Dr. Melissa Boyce, an Associate Dean, and 2 students, Alex Choi and Fiza Rajput. Following their discussion, we'll have a brief Q&A with you, the audience we have here today. Okay, next slide, please. The principle of creating a caring campus community has guided our work in mental health on our campus. The work we've done on our journey towards recognizing, destigmatizing, and providing mental health supports campus-wide have taught our community about the importance of resiliency while encouraging us all to be more compassionate, open-minded, and aware. We've grown on our journey these past 5 years as students, staff, faculty, and postdoctoral scholars. More importantly, we've grown as a campus community. We've been guided on this journey by Dr. Marshall, who has been instrumental to the development of the campus mental health strategy, as well as other strategies we have at UCalgary. As many of you may know, she will be leaving us after serving an incredible 10 years as our provost. We owe her a debt of gratitude for her leadership. It is fair to say Dr. Marshall is passionate, strong, caring force. We've been lucky to have her leadership and guidance on behalf of all of us who've worked on the campus mental health strategy from day 1 to today. 5 years later, thank you for your dedication to mental health, and thank you for teaching us on how to create a caring campus community. Welcome, Dr. Marshall.
Well, thanks very much for the kind words, Andrew, and welcome all to our update report celebrating 5 years since the launch of the campus mental health strategy. It's hard to believe it's been that long, but we're so pleased today to see so many of you that have joined us. More than 7 years ago, we first contemplated a mental health strategy for our campus. The idea resulted really when we looked at results from the College Health Assessment Survey in 2013-14, and then looked at our absentee data on staff. And clearly there were issues we needed to think very carefully about. Results were a bit shocking. And so we launched a task force in 2014 to put some parameters around our idea and to give it structure. And from there, we created a strategy, launched an implementation advisory committee, and began rolling out tangible, impactful changes on our campus. There were about 50 remarkable people involved in the process to develop the strategy, and I want to thank them all. And I would particularly like to recognize the work and impact of Glenda McQueen, who recently passed away. Glenda was a true champion of this work on our campus, and we all miss her dearly. The process to develop and implement the strategy and seeing tangible results has been a very rewarding journey. Truly, I would say one of my career highlights has been seeing this strategy impact our collective promotion of mental health, destigmatization of mental illness, instilling resilience, and the creation of a culture of caring and compassion on our campus. And the campus mental health strategy is as important, if not more so, now than it was when we began. I know we all know it's been more than a year since the pandemic fundamentally changed how we work, study, and learn on our campus. We've all had to adjust and face the challenges of working from home and being isolated from family, friends, and colleagues. And it's critical that we continue to look after our own mental health and support each other. One of the most important things we can do, and that our strategy is doing, is to increase the conversation around mental health and reduce the stigma related to mental illness. Over the past 5 years, the strategy has highlighted the lived experiences of mental health and mental illness on our campus from students, staff, faculty, and from our leaders through video stories and venues like this. Since the launch of our strategy, we have trained over 2,000 faculty and staff on mental health awareness and stigma reduction programs. Similarly, for our students, since the launch of this strategy, we have increased our outreach and training with over 8,000 students reached per year. That's a remarkable number. And in addition to growing the number of mental health training opportunities, services, and supports have increased and adapted to the needs of our campus community. For example, student wellness services have increased counseling capacity and case management support over the last 5 years with its coordinated care model. This includes support for international students, Indigenous students, and for issues related to harm reduction and substance abuse. At the same time, staff wellness and well-being and work-life portfolio have diversified their offerings and created the innovative role of mental health consultant. This role provides advice for faculty and staff and helps to bridge the campus community and community resources. This role is a first of its kind in Canadian post-secondary institution, just like the mental health strategy is. Creating that community of caring and improving mental health for our campus community couldn't be done without the collaborations between student wellness services, staff wellness, and the campus mental health strategy. Beyond these collaborations and partnerships, there are so many others. Over the past 5 years, we've made connections that also include 9 faculties, units, and departments that have taken on a leadership role in adopting the strategy within their own units and creating plans that are personalized to their units. And of course, our work also extends beyond our campus and into the wider community. In fact, it's fair to say we couldn't do what we do without the support and collaboration of our community partners. Those partners are far-reaching and include medical associations, nonprofit organizations, social organizations, and many more. Although the past year has been a challenge, there have been some significant bright spots. One was how our campus community came together to support each other through the changes the pandemic brought. just as we've seen during times of prior tragedy and hardship. And I would say over the past decade, in my view, we've experienced too much of that. Our community is caring and supportive when others are in need. One example of this was during You Flourish last fall. This is our annual celebration of mental health and resilience building on our campus. Many units, departments, faculties, clubs, and groups stepped up to host events that supported each other's well-being and created connections that were lacking. We had over 1,400 participants, more than double of any previous year. And as our instruction pivoted from in-person to online, our mental health supports also pivoted online. For example, the frontline staff at student wellness services were able to change how they supported mental health via online counseling. In addition, this group also implemented new single session counseling during the fall, increasing the timely access for students and reducing wait lists at a time when it was most critical to do that. The Wellbeing and Work-Life portfolio also transitioned to offering its mental health training for staff and faculty online. The final highlight I want to share with you is UCalgary's launch of our Suicide Awareness and Prevention Framework last October. This is yet another example that demonstrates how the work has not stopped during the pandemic. We formed an advisory committee that's focusing on a couple of priorities, including working with community partners to transition students to community services where needed, and then back to the campus when ready. This is such an important step for our campus to create a conversation on suicide and address very difficult issues head on. Through all the initiatives I've shared with you today, and actually the many, unfortunately, that we don't have time to talk about, we are making a real and meaningful difference in the lives of those around us. Addressing mental health and mental illness is rewarding, but I know it can be really difficult. It requires boldness, bravery, and vulnerability. To everyone who has been part of this journey from the start, thank you. We're so grateful for your contributions.
Thank you, Drew. On behalf of the campus community and those who have worked on the campus mental health strategy, thank you, Drew, for leading the way. We've been honored to work alongside you on this important initiative, and your guidance has been inspiring. As I look back over the past 5 years, the milestones that stand out for me include, for example, launching the embedded certificate in mental health, well-being, and resilience in fall of 2019. This is the first of its kind certificate in Canada and has already won a UCalgary Teaching Award for curriculum development. We've also awarded over $100,000 through Campus Mental Health Strategy Grants Program for projects that include stigma reduction initiatives, skill building, and strength-based training programs, as well as the projects that examine the intersection of teaching and learning and mental health and well-being. We've also launched the Working Mind and the Inquiring Mind workshops that have grown exponentially, reaching many thousands of participants from across our campus community. These are just some of the mini highlights, which we don't have time to talk about, all of them. But again, Drew, it has been a pleasure working with you on the campus mental health strategy. Thank you for your leadership, dedication, and passion. This is the point where we all stand up and clap and give you a standing ovation. Obviously, we can't do that, but feel free to do that at your home. We can't see you, so if you want to do that, feel free. So again, thank you, Drew, for your leadership and dedication over the years. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Ungar from Dalhousie University, who is joining us to talk about his work around mental health and resilience. Dr. Ungar is an internationally renowned expert on resilience. He is a full professor of social work at Dalhousie. He is a Canada Research Chair and has published over 300 scholarly works, including 17 books. He has worked with various organizations across Canada and throughout the world. Welcome, Dr. Ungar.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share a little bit, especially, you feel you're in really good company when Dr. Marshall, an amazing initiative, and it's nice to maybe just add a little bit of wind to the sails. There's a bit of a maritime metaphor for you, coming from the East Coast here today in Halifax. what I'd like to do is I want to just sort of set the stage for the panel, really, and talk a little bit about this concept of resilience and what it means perhaps on our communities and in our campuses. But let me start, before I get to the science, let me just start with a little vignette from one of the research studies which predates this research. And we were looking at young people's lives in that decade after high school. One of the project sites was actually Calgary, but there were others across Canada in different economic zones. And in that study, we met in the process of that. I happened to meet a young fellow who was sort of around 28 years old, who'd come out of a family that had recent immigrants to Canada and had very high expectations for their child to do a certain kind of career path. So this was a young fellow, and I just think about resilience in this case. He, when he was very artistic, and this was what, where he thought he would flourish. His parents were kind of a mind that it had to be law, medicine, or something like that. So off he goes to university, and he's pushed into some discipline that really does not reflect what he wants to do, which was a fine arts degree. So he ends up in, I think it was management studies or something, nothing against management studies, but it wasn't his passion. Anyways, ends up with a 4-year degree, gets out into the job market, completely unemployable, told the story of how he'd go to job interviews and they'd say, well, why would you like to work for Corporation X? And he'd go, well, because my mother sent me to this job. It wasn't going very well. When he was about 25, he actually ended up at the unemployment office, whatever, and there on the job bank board or whatever, he saw an ad that said, wanted people with artistic ability, good pay, benefits. That's an oxymoron. That's impossible to have all in the same job ad. So he goes and he applies. And what the job is, well, first of all, do any of you, I can't see your hands raised, but do any of you have an implant? I should specify, of course, a tooth implant. And if you do, you know that when you got your tooth implant, I have one actually, somebody designed the tooth in great detail so it matched the color and the tone and the design of your tooth, the rest of your teeth. And that is his job. He is a tooth sculptor and earns a good salary, has a routine in his life. He feels like he's got opportunities for promotion and entrepreneurship. It combines a little bit of his business backgrounds and everything else. And the best part of the story, now when his parents go to parties and say, what does your child do? And what does your child do? His parents supposedly are very proud to say, our son, he's a dentist. Now, okay, it's a little bit of a stretch, but there's actually some interesting ideas in that rather silly little story of a very successful young fellow about resilience. And I guess what we're beginning to understand through the science I do, literally on a global scale, is that there's 2 dimensions to our resilience. And that, of course, is that we can be rugged individuals, harking back to that rugged individualism that Herbert Hoover in 1928 sort of extolled in the American psyche. And that works when problems are relatively few. But what we also know is that resourced individuals tend to excel better in terms of marshaling together the many supports they need during a particularly difficult time, especially as problems mount in our lives. The good news is that generally speaking, we maintain some semblance of balance. In other words, we tend to, when we enter a post-secondary institution, or we take on work in a post-secondary institution, just enough stress. We spend to the limit of our credit card. We buy a house that we can afford. We seek opportunities to do things that we can handle in general. Of course, what happens is occasionally stressors enter our lives, and the accumulation of what's called allostatic load, or this notion of sort of accumulation that becomes almost embodied stress within us, can kind of unbalance us. And indeed, the resilience on one side, we just don't sometimes have enough supports, enough resources in our lives. And there's lots of things we can do. We could increase our self-capacity to cognitively cope with stress, change our attribution style, do lots of different things which have a good evidence base. We can also, as I've written about a variety of different sources, more as a sociological perspective on resilience, think about changing the world around us. We can find new opportunities, increase our friendship circles. They say, for instance, if you're going to have a New Year's resolution to go to the gym, don't buy a membership alone, buy 2, and make sure that you basically have someone who's going to hold you accountable. And of course, during a pandemic, what we've seen is actually what's happened is we've augmented the number of stressors. We now have financial concerns. If you're in a family where one of your partners, maybe your partner was in the service industry and their job has evaporated, maybe you watch all kinds of your savings dwindle, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen accumulation of health and economic concerns enter into people's lives. At the same time that we've stripped away all those opportunities to just go and have a recreational sport, to go travel and have a debauchery 2 weeks in a Club Med or whatever. I mean, we've literally stripped away many of the resources that we had at a very time that we needed them to cope during this particularly difficult time. So what we're actually getting at here is this kind of notion of what is resilience. If I was to take you back 3-4 decades ago, you'd find people talking about things like invulnerability. It's almost like we had this idea of these children running around with, capes off their back, who were leaping over tall buildings, who were able to survive. And there were actually books called The Invulnerable Child, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lot of research focused on our individual capacities. And that unfortunately still persists. We see a huge emphasis sometimes on individual cognitive adaptation. In other words, sometimes mindfulness-based stress reduction exercises that are given to people without much attention to the context or the risks that they actually face. So one does, unfortunately, have the taint in the field of resilience of kind of implying that you should just adapt to a toxic environment. Your boss is really, harassing you, that somehow, you should just think your way out of it. And of course, that's a terrible, terrible blaming the victim kind of understanding of what resilience is. And that's actually not reflecting what the science is anymore either. I just recently put out a book. We're looking at, my colleagues and I, we're now moving into thinking about multi-systemic resilience. We're thinking about all the different layers of our lives that have to come together to make us feel whole. So we know now that our microbiome, literally our gut bacteria, affects our immune systems, which affects our mood and potential for mood disorders. So in other words, during a pandemic, what you're eating, and indeed, how what is in your gut, in a sense, is going to give you a little bit more resistance to some of the mood disorders that you might be more susceptible to. But it goes even further, of course, our cognitions, the way we are thinking about the world, how we attribute. Do we blame ourselves for our unemployment or the stress or the fact that this technology or the number of Zoom hours we're having to spend, et cetera, et cetera? These cognitions kind of begin to accumulate, and they affect us at a biological level, of course, too. They influence how we embody the stress. But even going further, do we manage to make connections with our social networks through this particular period of time? I've really admired, I was recently working with one of the wealth management companies in Canada, and over the holidays just passed back in December, what they'd done is they realized that their teams were fraying. And so what they did was actually they sent every single member of this team, 65 people, a gingerbread house kit. And the idea was that they would all come online at exactly the same moment with their families and with the screen blurring taken off, so that people would actually have a peek into each other's families. The kinds of conversations that normally we would have when we're just at lunch with each other in an office would be stimulated by watching everyone do the same thing, build this gingerbread house at the same time. And let's face it, most of them look like Pinterest fails. But that was sort of the joyous fun of the whole darn thing. So we begin to sort of think about, how do we create even this kind of sociability, whether it's online or in person? And indeed, that brings us into the built environment around us, how we organize our offices and design our residences. It's how we position people to make them bump into each other. Whether or not, it's the difference between just giving a green space in a community. And as we just recently saw in a place like Regent Park, one of the housing developments in downtown Toronto, where you actually see people designing dog parks, where you can't just kind of walk through the green space, but it's now animated. It draws people to stop. And of course, what this is doing is it's also meaning that our natural environment is really implicated. And that can be, let's face it, if you're shut in your condo, then even just putting a plant on the window and cultivating that seems to have some mental health bolstering capacity. So I'm going to suggest that maybe we just need to understand resilience as where there's exposure to adversity, maybe it's our capacity to navigate to all the psychological, social, cultural resources that we need to sustain our well-being. But it's got to be more than that. It's got to be more than just our ability to make our way or to feel motivated to find what we need. It's got to also be about our ability to ask for or get what we need in culturally meaningful ways. So while this idea of navigation and negotiation is what we're sort of exploring globally. In fact, even one of our huge research studies is being funded in Drayton Valley, Alberta, where we're looking at a community that's going through a huge shift in terms of what is energy and what that community sustainability is going to look like for young people who want to stay in that community, who want to get education in that community. So we've been working with, over the last 5 years, with this cohort of young people as they adapt to boom and bust economic cycles. And they're matched with a group in South Africa as well. But all of this is saying to us, how do people cope with these external problems? And there is some answer to that. We know, for instance, and I'm not going to go into this in great detail here, but I do want to sort of just maybe highlight a few things that might be of interest. And then hopefully the panel will be able to sort of pick up on some of these themes. We know, for instance, that we do much better with structure in our lives. There's been now some recent studies during the pandemic that say, for instance, families that provide their children with routines, expectations, bedtimes, et cetera, are doing much better during this pandemic and showing lower rates of anxiety and depression. We also know, for instance, that accountability is really key, that we have that sort of sense of being, that somebody needs us, regular work hours, check-ins, being accountable to either within a classroom, in our studies, to our family. That it's no wonder that everyone's bought pets. There are no more dogs left in the pound in Halifax because everyone's adopted one. I wonder if just intuitively we know that we need someone to rely on us and to create a routine to our very day. Cats, I don't know if they do that, by the way, but I think dogs. Anyways, we can debate that over coffee some point. We also need to swipe left or is it swipe left or I don't know. Anyways, you got to swipe somehow and you got to find some love from somebody else. Yes, that's a big part of resilience, that sustainable intimacy of a caring relationship, but that doesn't have to come through that one specific person. We know that, a solid relationship with anybody in your life, whether that's a roommate or a parent, et cetera, can be a good substitute. Support from others, that's your classmates. Do you actually just schedule time with your classmates or, and your work teams to not have a focused agenda, but sometimes just to actually just share your lives with each other? We also need that powerful identity. And so many of us have watched this evaporate. If you had volunteer activities or you found through the performance of your academic activities a certain elevation of who you are, that sense of pride in what you can contribute, a lot of that is evaporated at the moment, and people are finding that other substitution through other activities, volunteer activities, community activities. I live in the Maritimes here, and I like to call ourselves at least casserole people, because it's in that sharing of the casserole down the street when so-and-so needs a little extra help that there's a little bit of a sense of I am a member of my community and I have something to give. It also increases our sense of control. We know that anything you can do to maintain that sense of control within your life right now, to make decisions that are important, even if that is just telling your kids that, you go build a blanket fort behind the couch. I can't come into your blanket fort. I'm going to hang a blanket on my door. You can't come into my office. I mean, anything that we can do in terms of that control. A sense of belonging. Again, that notion that we want to feel like we have our sense of our culture and our place, and that we're valued for that, and we have a sense of cohesion elsewhere in our lives. It's why I think the Carleton University a few years back instigated that Carleton 100 experiment, which basically took students in their first year, gathered them, because most of them took exactly the same subject. So they'd gather them into the one group of groups of 100. So they'd be moving around class to class to class in this consistent network of people. And it's a lot easier to create a sense of belonging and attachment when the physical environment, in other words, adapts to make it possible to have those associations. And just very quickly, obviously, at this moment, it should go without saying that resilience relies on social justice, and that we need to feel like we're treated fairly. We need our basic needs met, including transportation systems. Maybe it's a parking spot. It's basically, that we have enough, capacity to do what we need to do. We need to have physical health, some financial health, of course, as well. And finally, yes, some positive thinking, that ability to just basically feel good and have that sense of not blaming ourselves when things are beyond our control. The last thought I want to leave here, just before I turn to the panel, is that if I've put positive thinking last, it's because the science of resilience is showing that if we provide environments rich in opportunities through our educational institutions, through your supervisor in the workplace, to give us all these other 11 things, in general, positive thinking follows. We tend to have a better orientation towards our future. It does work somewhat the other way. If my workplace gives me all these other things and I'm still kind of a curmudgeon, maybe I need a little bit of change in my thinking to actually take advantage of the opportunities around me. But it's a balance between being a rugged individual and a well-resourced individual, which implicates not just my head, but also the people around me who have a responsibility to provide the resources I need to do well. And that is fundamentally what the science of resilience is giving us these days. So on that note, I'm going to pause, and I think we're going to have an opportunity to talk with the panel. So I'm going to come out of my presentation, and I'll pass it back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Dr. Ungar. We really appreciate, setting us up for the panel, and your great thoughts on resilience and helping us define resilience. Now let's welcome our panelists for a discussion. First, we have Fiza Rajput. She is currently a second-year student pursuing a biology degree at UCalgary. She is the founder and president of Mental Health for South Asia, an organization dedicated to dismantling stigma and mental illness in the South Asian community, and she's also an advocate for mental wellness.
Hi, Andrew, do you want to introduce all three panelists?
Yes, I'm going to introduce all three, yeah. Alex Choi is in his final year in the MSc in Counseling Psychology at Workland School of Education, and he's also currently the co-president of the Graduate Pan Psychology Partnership. His research and practice interests include cultural influences on mental health service engagement and mental health needs and initiatives among post-secondary students. And finally, we have Dr. Melissa Boyce. She is an associate dean in the Faculty of Arts. She is also the chair of the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee of the Campus Fellow Strategy and academic coordinator of the Embedded Certificate in Mental Wellbeing and Resilience. She is also my colleague in psychology. Her research interests include collaborative learning, student engagement, and student well-being. Before I turn it back to you, Michael, I just wanted to remind everybody that we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this. So please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A, and I'll moderate that when the panel is done their discussion. So I'll turn it back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Andrew. And it's really great to see Fiza, Alex, and Dr. Boyce again. Wonderful to reconnect. So Fiza, can I put you on the spot first? Is that okay? And maybe just I would love to hear just a little bit about what's been your experience, just kind of briefly, what's been your experience during the pandemic and what's happening for you?
Absolutely. So, I think for me, the really one biggest challenge I've had to overcome during the pandemic, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but just feelings of isolation and loneliness. And I say that because, coming from a very stereotypical Pakistani conservative family, already there's so much communication in my house, there's so much lack of communication about feelings and emotions. And so, while a lot of my friends are really happy that they get to spend time with their families, for me, it's been, a lot harder to, I guess, empathize with that, just because for me, this sense of and family time is quite a foreign concept, right? And so extending that a little bit further, I think my parents have also just raised me in such a way that, my only real role and responsibility is to be a good student, right? And so that sort of means no excessive hangouts with friends on the weekends. And so for me, like the biggest thing about going to university was that it was a really big out for me, because even if I couldn't see my friends, on the weekends, maybe because I had school, I could see them, right? And so with the pandemic and being at home, I guess in a sense, I lost my out and I didn't really have anyone to talk about things with. And again, I just want to say I recognize this isn't because my parents have any sort of ill will towards me or anything, but this is just how they've been raised. And I think this is sort of a common theme we see within South Asian communities.
Well, actually, maybe what I'll do is maybe I'm just thinking, why don't I pick up on some of those challenges and go to Alex for a second, and then we'll come back around to some of the protective factors, which you're hinting at as well. But Alex, same question. What's been your experience during this period of the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. When you were speaking, I really resonated with the challenge around lack of routine and structure. For me, it's been difficulties with kind of boundaries around work and rest, because you're now working from home. It's the same space that you work in, and then you also rest. Going from almost never shutting off my working mind to kind of crashing with it, and at times near total avoidance of writing and academics. And for me, that's led to some anxiety, uncertainty about career following me completing my program. It's what you're talking about. It's, where do I fit in? What do I have to excuse me, what do I have to offer in these challenging times? And for myself, having some predisposition to mental health concerns, there was a moment where I'm driving back from a connection with my family doctor, following discussing the possibility of starting medication for mood concerns, and it was almost to the point where I almost had to kind of pull over on the side, feeling emotional, thinking to myself, even though I'd never dream of suggesting that this was the case to anybody else, that, is this me considering giving up? Like, am I not trying hard enough, that I need to go to other things for this? And now I realize that's not the case, but maybe we can pick up on that a little later in the conversation.
It's so easy to sort of begin to sort of own it and not see it as a situational that
Mm,
we're all under. I mean, it would be normal. It's normal to feel it, and it's kind of abnormal not to feel the stress.
mm.
Thanks for that. Dr. Boyce, Melissa, can I bounce this to you? And you, I know you'll come at this maybe from a little bit more of the perspective also as faculty at the university. Or
Yes.
staff too.
The sort of the challenge that I'd like to address is establishing connections within an online learning platform, which is a new experience to most of us at the university, both for the students and for faculty. And on the faculty side, that desire to build rapport with students, to create that community, we all know that that promotes positive learning experiences. But on the flip side, and so that can cause instructors to want to ensure that video cameras are on, so they're not staring at the black boxes, things like that. But then I also get feedback from students, and so I'll give a very short story that I about a student. And so this was a student who contacted me, and they were concerned because they said they felt like they had to have their video camera on for their classmates, so that it felt like a classroom. But they indicated that they're in a large family in a small space, and both parents have been laid off because of COVID. And there are kids who are not yet school age who are at home. And with the sounds and busyness, the only place that this individual is able to find quiet for learning in class over Zoom is in the closet. And so the student said that they just felt really uncomfortable turning their camera on because other students would be able to see that the clothing is hung up around them. And so I think the two perspectives, and both having very positive goals, because the students certainly wanted to be able to build a community as well, but these challenges are real.
That's a really great example of the multiple levels of stress that we face, whether it's just doubting ourselves, the messages, your message from parents, or just the physical place that I'm, just the threats of what brings with poverty and internet access problems and everything else. So thanks for that. But in the spirit of what we're doing here today, could I shift the conversation slightly and come back maybe to Fizza and say, hey, so what are there strategies that you have found that are actually being kind of effective to help you cope during this particular period?
For sure. So I guess I talked a lot about how I couldn't really talk to any of my family and I felt like I had no out. And so sort of what you spoke about in your presentation about, creating a powerful identity and, making those supportive relationships, I found that just spending my time doing something else and really, involving myself in that really helped. And so for me, during the summer, I worked on creating my organization, which was Mental Health for South Asia. And so, in that, I really tried my best to create a platform in which other students could talk with each other about some of the same situations that I was struggling with in my home. Because, I know as just speaking with a lot of my other friends and just growing up here and seeing other South Asian households, I know it's not just unique to me. I know a lot of my friends aren't able to speak with their parents, and so I think just really coming up and solidifying my idea for the university club really helped me not only meet other people, so getting that supportive relationship, but then also taking control of who I wanted to be and creating that powerful identity for myself.
You're raising some patterns, and maybe just to play the scientist just for half a second, but there's been some really great studies that are showing that our online communities are not all dysfunctional. Like, I know there's a bit of a taint, almost like you're connecting online to people that somehow that's worse or lesser than. And more we're understanding that if you're actively involved on an online community, posting, contributing, it does give you, which exactly I think you're saying, is that sense of power, control, decision-making, identity, sense of contribution, self-worth. These things are triggered. And just so everyone doesn't run off and start an organization, I really admire you for doing that. But I also know that I can't even buy a guitar in how I can't get a dog at the pound, and I can't get a guitar at the guitar store because they're all sold out. Because everyone is basically trying to find new identities. They're suddenly going, hey, I'm going to explore other talents in this particular phase of my life. So I think you're echoing, I mean, it's so admirable what you've done there, but I think people are seeking other ways of constructing some sense of who they are in really positive ways. It's a wonderful example. And if I might bounce this to Alex, same with all that on the roadside, et cetera, how are you coping? What has actually worked to carry you through all this?
I think a lot of it has just been around conversations with folks, and also being able to get creative around spaces and boundaries, kind of get moving. A story comes to mind. I was dog sitting for my family, and at the same time, I was connecting with a friend who is a professional musician. He's a violinist, and I also play at an amateur level. And it was kind of cute because there's not a lot of space in the apartment that I'm at, but the dog's following me around like every little space. Like, it's all one area. Like, the living room is right next to the kitchen, is right next to the bedroom, and the dog's like, oh, I guess we're going to the kitchen. Oh, okay, now we're going to the bathroom. Let's go to the bathroom. So I go to the other room and get on a Zoom with my friend. Dog follows, right? It's different spaces from where I work, even if it's 5 feet away. And it's fun. We're just chatting with a friend. He's giving me some tips on playing. He's getting me to like flap my arms like this to kind of get loose, because that helps for music. And it just leads into an organic conversation about some of the challenges that we've been having, realizing that, oh, I'm not the only one who has questions or concerns about, how do I handle, picking up packages or a food delivery or something? How do you be contactless with that? And I realized by sharing with him, like, maybe I have something to offer too, some perspective.
That's a terrific example, and exactly where we're seeing people going, where we by changing that world around you, by creating an adapted environment, it takes the pressure off of us, I think, to just only do this in our heads, right? To say, okay, I've just got to look in the mirror and say I'm perfect, and self-affirm, show gratitude. Those things help, by the way. Gratitude exercises at the end of the day to notice what's gone right. Good science under that too. But there's something about actually having moments in your day that would give you the pause for gratitude. It puts me in mind, by the way, of social. There's a whole trend in medicine now called social prescribing. It's coming out of Britain largely, but it's finding its way in Canada, where, you know, family physicians are literally writing scripts that say something like, you know, don't take 2 aspirin, just, you know, here's 2 tickets and go to a movie with a friend, when we used to go to movies with friends. But there is that sort of sense of, you know, adapted environments that actually bolster us, like you're doing with this other musician. What a gift, exactly what to go looking for, and can be done with your classmates as well. So Melissa, maybe the same kind of question. What are you seeing as protective factors that are perhaps any good examples of what is working?
Yeah, I've been really impressed with the way that that instructors have helped students in the classroom to see that in online settings there can actually be more ways to communicate than within the classroom sometimes, and even when there are situations going on where a student doesn't want to put a camera on or doesn't want to unmute themselves, instructors who make it explicit at the beginning of every class when a discussion occurs that that you can ask the question out loud if you want. You can use the raise hand button, or you can put it in the chat, and you can put it in the chat so everyone can see it, or as a direct message to the instructor. And so there's less social risk sometimes in asking the question, because you can ensure that that the instructor is able to get that that your question will be heard, and then making students more comfortable with the idea of asking questions or contributing to discussions by starting classes or building into each class those social moments. So those moments where the students have an opportunity, with the instructor not standing there watching them, so in, say, breakout sessions, to be able to chat with each other, to be able to communicate with each other, and knowing that some students might be doing that via the chat, whereas others might be contributing orally, which has really created some interesting multimodality possibilities.
I think again, you're raising some interesting questions. I know that the tendency at first among I teach a lot online, so I think it was a familiar, but I did find initially some of my colleagues, what they did was they just basically, if their class was scheduled Tuesdays from, you know, for that hour, they just basically lectured for the hour. But online has a different pedagogy. It's much more about facilitating connections and learning in smaller bite-sized bits, and it's not entirely just the same lecture that you can do and animate a room. It has to change, which I guess kind of speaks to this. I've often heard that our resilience in a time like this is about flexibility, adaptation, and hopefully some degree of transformation. Again, just kind of coming back to, I mean, I'm also curious if we could, I mean, there's other things going on besides the pandemic right now that's testing our resilience. It's about bigger issues, social justice issues. And I know some research I just did in the States with a big organization down there showed that, you know, people in universities, colleges were really feeling the stress of, you know, this eruption of social justice issues, climate justice, Me Too, Indigenous rights, Black Lives Matter. Are you hearing this as a stressor, and not in a bad way necessarily, but also you seeing people coping? And maybe again, I pass this back to Fizza. Are you seeing people coping well with this particular moment in time?
You know what? I think in terms of just everything going on and taking everything into consideration, I think overall people are trying their best to cope, but I don't necessarily think, you know, they are coping, right? Because again, just with so many different things going on in the world, it's just very difficult to figure out, you know, what strategies work for what, right? Because again, like mental health aside, that has a whole range of other sorts of strategies, right? For example, like, I don't know, taking some time for yourself, or maybe talking with other people, or you know, just doing something for self-care, right? But then you look at some of the social injustices that have been occurring, and some of that can really resonate with you for a really long time. And so, you know, trying to figure out, I find, you know, trying to figure out I guess how to cope with that sometimes can be a lot harder, just because, you know, it's so much less talked about, and you know, there's, yeah, essentially it's not really talked about, right?
And I think it's funny, that's what some of the research needs to be saying, is the transparency of having real conversations decreases the stress. Taking some control, Greta Thunberg was really, in a sense, brilliant in that she gave kids that small thing. You can leave school for that afternoon or whatever, you can take a small bit of action towards a global issue that seems completely you are powerless to control. And I can't help but think that, introducing those kinds of things into our lives perhaps helps a little bit with mental health, isn't it? It's a mental health intervention as much as a social empowerment intervention. Alex, can I just turn other strategies that you're using to cope or with anything that's going on?
Yeah, I definitely resonate with what you're saying, Fizza. It's with the social unrest that's out there lately. It can at times feel like really nebulous or like such a large issue. Like, where do I even begin? Kind of more on a personal note, some of the news coming out about the rise of like East Asian uh, behavior or crimes even. It's gotten me thinking about, how does society, view people who might look like me, who identifies as East Asian. Um, Although I'm thankful to not have experienced any kind of overt racism or anything like that, something that's out there is that you actually spoke about a little bit, Michael, is this sense that there actually, in my own research and my own personal experience, there exists this kind of public view or societal view of East Asian people as potentially very successful academically or occupationally. It adds a lot of pressure for folks in my position in life to try and succeed on a time that resonates with people's social clock, like by this age. And something that was mentioned here was just being able to talk about it, to name it and say, hey, this is something that's out there. I'm not the only person who feels this way. I was chatting with my brother about, he was asking me what my thoughts were on him going back to, professional school for healthcare or something, instead of growing his current business in multimedia and graphic design. And that led to this like kind of broader systemic conversation about, how, what does it mean to be, East Asian Canadian in this time, with a lot of this kind of social highlighting of social location and things like that.
I'm glad you're bringing this up, actually, and I think we do sort of have to understand our position in all of this and the stress and culture, race issues. I mean, I know sometimes we have these conversations in two different tents almost, but they're linked, right? I mean, and that's why a mindfulness-based stress reduction exercise will have different impact depending on your risk factors, what it means and how it lands, and whether or not other parts of your life are actually changed as well. So it does kind of draw us into these kinds of conversations about diversity and some of the great benefits of that as well. Melissa, just before we go, I know we want to open it up to some questions here in a minute or two, but Melissa, just any other thoughts on protective factors that you're seeing working well for people at this particular moment?
Yeah, I would say that that I think a protective factor that helps us and helps each other, helps us to support each other, is to keep in mind that we're all human and we have to treat each other like everyone is human, and we're all dealing with various things, and we don't even know the various challenges that another individual might be dealing with just generally, and then with potentially COVID exacerbating that. And to hope that other people will give us that flexibility as well, and to be kind to ourselves, because I know I'm a bit of a workaholic, and at the end of the day I feel like I never got enough done or I never contributed enough, but we need to keep in mind that we do our best and our best is good enough.
That's a wonderful thought to bring this fully around, isn't it? That some of that self-care, self-acceptance, turning off the email at a certain point in the day, they've really, a lot of this resilience stuff is about setting up those boundaries and those opportunities so we can thrive with other people. And some of the examples you've all three given really resonate with that. Andrew, I understood that people may want to pose questions and to anyone on the panel. thoughts, reflections on what's working for them maybe as well, just to kind of add to the almost like a stone soup kind of thing where, you know, putting it all together to make a thick broth here and different ideas. Anything coming in on the chat that you'd like to sort of put into the mix?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you, panelists, for this great discussion. We're getting lots of questions. But one question actually I want to pose before we get to some of the panelist questions. And Drew, if you had a question, please feel free to chip in as well. What are some concrete things that we can do to support each other? You know, whether you're a student, whether you're a faculty member, whether you're a staff member, what are some concrete things that we can do to support each other, right? To really build that community resilience or build that community sense of community that we're currently lacking.
Melissa, or just around the panel, each want to just try adding one thought on that real quick?
I would say send out a thank you once a day to someone who did something that that supported you, because I think a lot of times we're doing these things, and people are helping us, but we don't necessarily show that gratitude, and it goes a long way.
The letter. Alex?
Yeah, kind of along the same theme, I think just continuing to share stories about personal experience. There's this almost this pressure, it seems, to present well, to present like I have everything together, right? To present like I am that rugged individual, like I'm not affected by this, and I'm coping well. But I think there's a lot to be said about kind of connecting to the bigger picture and feeling like you're in it together with other folks. Because I'm not the only one having concerns that might be exacerbated by these unique times.
Thanks. Fiza?
I would say just recognizing that, look, we're all human. That includes students, and that also includes professors. I think a lot of times professors are really trying their best to, make online school as good as it can be for students. And sometimes maybe students forget to realize and they sort of like fail to acknowledge that, this is a very stressful time for professors as well. And so, if we want professors to be kind to us and sort of show us that leniency, I think it should be a reciprocal sort of relationship. And so I think just recognizing that, we're all in this, we are all going through everything together. And I think just, taking solace in that.
I just sort of add to that finding meaning in the suffering. We know from, you look at why people get through war without suffering PTSD, and there's plenty of evidence that lots of people do. And the reason is often attributed to the fact that their suffering is put into the context of meaning, that they see whatever it is that they're having to compromise as part of a community contract, a community good. So, staying focused on that and sharing the I love Alex's point about sharing vulnerability, or Melissa, you're also about, keeping connected. Andrew, back to you.
Yeah, so here's a question from our audience. This is something that we've tried to do with the Campus Middle strategy, is really to think of, your picture with the concentric circles, and really thinking about the broader circles, but really think about specifically about built environment. Do we need to consider new ways to structure supportive built environments, both on our campus and in our community, in the face of the chasms in some of the traditional resources within our social world due to the pandemic? Are there key considerations and new practical ways of thinking, planning that we should prioritize and moving forward during now and even after the pandemic? So really thinking about the built environment. Are there things that we can do within that sphere?
Wow. Are we panelists? Anybody want to take that, or even Dr. Marshall? I wonder if you kind of had any big thoughts on how you create structures around us. I certainly have some idea, but pass it. Other thoughts? Jump in.
I think this is a really key issue for any university to think of very carefully as you move forward. Think of the space that we have now on our campus, even for office space for professors, which is private, 4 walls, closed into a space. One wonders when we come out of this. I know some people have said, you know what, I really like teaching from home or working from home, and students have said the same thing. I actually don't want to come to work. Is it time where we set up different kind of spaces, collaborative spaces, for example, where maybe you've got groups of people that live in the same space and share the same space and work together and come together in such ways that it makes you want to come to work. It makes you want to be part of something different and bigger than's going on. And I think being creative around that is going to be really, really critical to get people back to campus, to do things in a different way. I know in the retreats we had earlier this year, Michael, with the deans and the vice provosts, one of the biggest lessons was how do we ensure the creativity that has really gotten us through the year is going to be maintained when we come back to campus? How do we allow ourselves to think in different ways than we normally have and continue to do that, even when we go back to what most people call normal? I think we'll never get back to normal. There will be a new normal that will be established somewhere along the line. But before I leave this, I just want to say I'm so impressed with the panelists today and your willingness and courage to share vulnerabilities. It's really been a spectacular conversation.
Thanks. I'm just curious, other panelists, are any examples you've seen about whether as students or as faculty or staff, where the physical plant of your lives or the university has actually made it easier to cope during this particular time? Has been anything that's been particularly facilitative, protective? Nothing comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think about physical spaces a little bit, Michael. It's one of the points in the campus mental health strategy, and some of the spaces I think in like Taylor Library, for example, it's really open concept. All of the workrooms are glass, right? So you can see folks doing things, working together, collaborating. Something that Dr. Marshall is touching on is, what is this new normal going to look like? It might be different than like a stereotypical office place from, movies that you might see where it's cubicle on cubicle on cubicle. How is it that we can continue being creative about the actual physical workspaces that we have set up, if and when we return to those things?
I've published with, whatever, Terry Peters in Toronto, talks about super architecture, not just architecture that functions for people, but architecture that actually improves people. So when you bring in light, you actually elevate mood, like where the architecture is actively changing people's lives and mental health for the better. Melissa, thoughts just there, and then we'll go to another question from Andrew.
I think it's an interesting idea, and the immediate thing, notion that comes to me is how great it is when you're physically in a classroom that has windows, and how that is a challenge certainly, and how in the post-pandemic world, I don't see us moving entirely back to in-person. I think that we can take advantage of this increased flexibility and more online offerings, and being able to help students who have very busy lives to potentially be able to register in some courses that are asynchronous, where they'll be able to build their schedules themselves, that type of thing. And then they will have some control over their environment. They can pull their chair closer to a window so that they can do that learning in the light.
That's a great example. Just to move this, Andrew, you said there was a lot of questions. So can I bounce back to you for a second?
Yeah, so there's some questions about online learning and how do we support each other better within that online environment. We've talked about not making everybody turn on their cameras because we have our own circumstances and things like that. What are other things that we can do within the online learning environment to better support each other?
Fiza, any thoughts on that? As a student, anything you've seen with you or your colleagues that's working well?
Sure. So as a student, I found that a lot of Discord servers have actually been very, very beneficial. I recognize that there is a whole sort of, concern regarding cheating and everything. But with that being said, I think for the most part, in any Discord servers I've been involved in, all of the admin, they make sure they set off the Discord, like the Discord channel is closed when assessments are taking place, so that no conversation regarding exam material can be discussed. And even sometimes people might be a little bit, I don't know, confused, like, can we talk about this? Can we not? And so for the most part, I think, majority of the Discord servers, they decide, no, we're not going to talk about this and we're going to be responsible. And so I think just having that option is great because number one, we can be anonymous. And I think that, that sense of anonymity can, I don't know, I guess in a sense be powerful because you can really express yourself. And then number two, it can be really helpful in answering questions and just getting, I guess, ideas from, your peers and sort of, figuring out like, oh, what is this lab asking? Or like, what are the expectations of this, professor's assignment and, things like that.
Maybe I'm the only one on this call of 600 that actually, what is a Discord server?
Oh, so Discord
Sorry,
essentially, so it's an app, and it works. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with Slack at all?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's similar to
But you might have to
Slack.
explain that to some people too. What's
Sure. So essentially, it's kind of like a large group chat, I want to say, in which you can create different channels within the group chat. And then there are options for, video calling or voice calling. And these channels, they're a little bit more advanced than, your regular WhatsApp or messaging service because you can, regulate and moderate what's like who's saying what.
I see. So creating community through online, that's actually a space for students to really get into the material and swap ideas in the same ways you would in the hallway before going into class. Yeah. That's also called slacking off. No, never mind. Anyways, can I pass any other comments on that? Alex or Melissa, just quickly, any other quick thought on that? The online making it work better?
I would just add that it's been honestly inspiring to see how students naturally form those communities and connections. And so these Discord channels were not anything that was created by instructors. It was the students who did this, and it was student driven. And I know that instructors can certainly create D2L discussion forums and things like that, but students want to have their space. And I think having an openness to that and facilitating that where it's possible within classes has really helped some classes to really thrive in that online context and to really create some great communities.
Alex, just quickly, are you connected? You still feel connected to other students?
Yeah, here and there, right? Like I think I'm in a unique position because I'm done all my coursework. I'm just doing kind of individual writing. But what's been helpful for me is just kind of having shared writing spaces where everyone just kind of shows up. We don't even need to necessarily say anything. We're just there to kind of like unmute ourselves and bounce questions like, hey, how does this read or whatnot? But it's creating that structure and that accountability where we're all going to show up around this time. So that's something from kind of the graduate perspective that has made a difference, similar to like kind of like a study huddle or whatnot, but it's writing.
You raised a couple of good words: accountability, structure. I would add reciprocity in terms of relationships, that my contribution adds to your experience. Those aren't just auxiliary ideas. Those are foundational to when we study, what gets people through a major crisis, whether it's a wildfire or indeed now a pandemic. Those factors seem to appear. Andrew, do you want to jump in with another question?
Yeah, we've got time for a couple of short questions. Here's one question. This person is thanking FISA for the comment about we are all in this experience together. What are the panel's thoughts about keeping the sentiment as we emerge from the pandemic?
How to keep it going. Fizza, do you have any team motivation? How are we going to keep this? We've learned a lot. How are you going to keep it going?
I think again, just remembering that even as the pandemic sort of starts to subside, just recognizing again that as university students, we still share that that common goal of, you know, graduating and getting our degrees, and recognizing that, you know, we are taking you know, heavy course loads, and the material is stressful, right? So just recognizing that even if the pandemic is not as big of a deal as it has been, you know, understanding that we all still have some of those shared experiences, and that, you know, we're still university students, we still share similar struggles with, you know, difficult courses, and you know, learning to adapt to different professors' teaching styles.
Cool. Melissa, any thoughts? Keeping this going?
No, I think Fiza really summed it up very well, and so I'm not sure that I can contribute anything above and beyond that, except for I would say that looking at it from the instructor's perspective, and when talking to instructors, I've been really happy with the increased flexibility that instructors have shown students as they're dealing with a lot of these challenges, and I would be really happy if I saw that continue moving forward. And I know that that it can be challenging when you've got grading deadlines and you're trying to follow your own schedule. But I think if we can support each other in that way, even after this, I think it'll be great.
Alex, one last quick little sentence, if you want.
Yeah, just to kind of touch back on gratitude. I mean, we've all had the now challenge of realizing that maybe sometimes like our community opportunities before this pandemic at times may be taken for granted. And so once we're out there, just to be able to realize, hey, this is the value of this. We've been without uh, kind of the same form of it in community connection for the better part of a year now, and really going out there to seeing what we can do about that moving forward.
Thanks.
Reconnecting.
I would just add that I think we've started a conversation where it's much easier to talk about mental health issues because we're all under stress. I hope that continues. I also think that I'm seeing and hearing from my clinical colleagues that a lot of people actually like doing counseling online, especially young people who are, you know, digital natives. They're quite comfortable and they don't like to go to a therapist's office and all the associated inconveniences of that. And they want to remain online, which kind of gives me hope that maybe more people will seek more effective treatments before problems get more accentuated. So Andrew, back to you.
Yeah, and so, you know, just on that last thread there, you know, is there any positives? You know, we don't want to minimize all the bad things that have happened, but we've got to recognize that. But is there any glimmer of hope, any positive silver lining that's coming out of this pandemic? And I'd like also Dr. Marshall to answer that as well, to give her the last word.
Just in 15 seconds to go around the panel. Fiza, perhaps first.
You know what? I think we've learned a lot of new things during the pandemic. I think we've changed learning styles. I think, you know, primarily for the better, giving students flexibility. So, you know, I think there is still hope for, you know, better, more improved learning.
Alex?
I would hope that it's, you know, grown everyone's ability to kind of adapt and be creative around problem solving, around finding alternative solutions to the things that we so desperately need, as well as just kind of back to that understanding piece. There's more conversation, there's more understanding, more openness to be able to talk about challenges, how to address them, mental health, and mental illness as it is.
What's that? Melissa?
I would say a positive would be that it's really underscored the importance of community, and it's invited us to find all of these new ways. And so with the creative thinking, to find all these new ways to create these connections and to sustain them. And in some cases to even expand our circles beyond what we would have previously.
There are definitely advantages. Dr. Marshall?
Well, I would say we've learned different and more effective ways to do things. Meetings, for example, don't have to be 2 hours. You can do things often in an hour and be really efficient and effective at doing them. The other thing I would say is the importance of human connection. And while this has been great, I think we recognize how important people are to us. and that it's going to be really great if you haven't started those connections to get back and do that on a face-to-face way.
And I might just echo that I know it's easy to sustain relationships online, but it's hard to jumpstart really meaningful new ones. And I would also say that I love the flexibility that I'm seeing the fields, that we're learning how to be more resilient, to use the word of the day, by engaging with the technologies that are available. Some of that's to our advantage. Hopefully it's a balance between what we've lost and what we're gaining as well. So with that, I'll pass it back to Andrew.
Thank you, Dr. Ungar. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Dr. Marshall. You've all given us a lot to think about. And thank you for those who participated in today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. We hope today's progress updates and the panel discussion helps inspire you to continue the conversation on how to build resilience in our own lives and within the community, because we've been really talking about community resilience. There are tools that we can use to build connections, make changes in our lives, and to better support our well-being. But what I hope everyone takes away from today's talk is that UCalgary does have supports in place for our campus community. And if you need assistance, we want you to reach out. We've achieved a lot over the past 5 years, and there's still room to improve. There always is, of course. So please join us on this journey to creating a caring campus community. If you'd like to learn more about the campus mental health strategy, please go visit our website. And once again, I want to thank everybody. And I do want to thank Dr. Marshall again, Drew. It's been, again, a pleasure to work with you through the past 5 years. And we'll miss you. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll have a great afternoon.